The words left Mia Bennett's mouth before she could catch them. "Kiss me like you mean it." They hung between her and the stranger whose steel blue eyes widened in the crisp autumn air. Around them Manhattan rushed on, horns, hurried footsteps, 100 lives intersecting. But suddenly the noise blurred until it was only the two of them. 20 minutes earlier, she'd been charging toward Everest Media's glass tower, portfolio clasped under her arm and a carefully rehearsed introduction rolling through her head. After years of freelancing, this creative director role meant stability, recognition, validation for all the nights she'd chosen work over comfort. Then someone bumped her. Scalding espresso cascaded down her carefully chosen cream blouse. Makeup threatened to run. Tears of frustration pricked at her eyes. She fumbled for napkins.
"Here," said a deep voice, offering a pristine handkerchief. "Soda water and a touch of salt works every time."
Time did that peculiar thing when something small and unexpected interrupts everything. It slowed. The man had no tie, his collar open, hair loosened by the breeze, a 5 o'clock shadow that sharpened a jawline. He moved with the ease of someone who had learned the city's rhythms. But it was his eyes, steady, amused, immediately present, that stopped her.
"I'm already late," Mia blurted, grateful for the cloth, but acutely aware of the minutes slipping by.
"First days are overrated," he said, smiling and making a dimple appear at his left cheek. "I skipped mine entirely." She laughed despite herself. "Must be nice," she said. "Freedom has complications," he offered cryptically. Then, before she could refuse, he steered her toward a department store. 10 minutes, you'll be presentable, I promise." Logic said run. Reason said she should dash to Everest and salvage a professional first impression. But his quiet confidence, the way he had spoken without pretense, tilted something in her. Inside the store, he guided her to women's wear and selected a silk blouse that matched the ruined cream she'd been wearing. He didn't check the price tag. His handing it to her felt like a small, unexamined generosity. When she stepped out of the fitting room transformed, his approval warmed something in her chest. "Perfect," he said. "What's the meeting about?" "My new boss," she answered, smoothing the collar. "Everyone says he's brilliant and a tyrant." "Not a chance," he said, amusement dancing in his voice. "Maybe reconsider." She glanced at her watch and gasped. "I have to go. Thank you." She fumbled for how to repay his kindness. "No need," he said. "Just promise you'll knock him dead." On the crosswalk, something unexpected rose in her. The man was a stranger, spontaneous, unbound, the kind of person who seemed immune to the constant calculation in her life. The words tumbled out, reckless and oddly sincere. "Kiss me like you mean it." Regret arrived in the same heartbeat. She apologized, cheeks burning. He laughed and, rather than rebuke her, made a deal. If she still wanted the kiss after her first day, meet him at the Meridian rooftop bar at 7. 15 minutes later, she was in Everest's lobby, palms clammy, trying to assemble professional composure from the fragments of a ridiculous morning. The receptionist guided her toward a conference room where 6 executives waited. Vivian Montgomery, the silver-bobbed VP of Operations, introduced herself and noted Richard Hayes was running late, a rarity. Mia took a seat, smoothing the new silk, and prepared to be judged by the work in her portfolio. When the door opened, breath left her in a small, involuntary gasp. The man from the crosswalk had arrived in a charcoal suit and crisp blue tie. He cut across the room with a presence that made other people's postures tighten. The dimpled smile was the same, so were the eyes. He took the head of the table and said, "Good morning. I see you've all met our new creative director." Her carefully assembled composure fractured with comic immediacy. She had propositioned the CEO. For the next 3 hours, she presented with a focus forged from embarrassment and determination.
Richard Hayes remained professional and incisive, asked pointed questions, praise where earned, never once making mockery of the morning's private exchange. An occasional flicker in his eyes suggested amusement or challenge, and that only made her skin prickle. After the meeting, he asked to discuss onboarding. Later, alone in her corner office with the Manhattan skyline in the background, someone knocked on her door and introduced herself as Grace Winters, the digital content manager from across the hall. Messy bun, freckled face, caffeine as a diplomatic offering. Grace brought gossip and warmth, briefing Mia on Everest's culture and the rumors that circled their CEO. Brilliant, private, philanthropic, unpredictable. When Vivian later delivered a thick folder, the Preston Hotel pitch, and a brief handwritten note that read 7 p.m., Ria's memory leapt to the Meridian deal. The smart move would have been to go home, study the materials, keep professional distance. Yet curiosity, fueled by his confident handwriting, pulled her toward the rooftop. She arrived at 6:55 in a dress she kept for late nights and after-work events, heart a mix of dread and curiosity. Richard stood at the balcony rail, silhouetted against the city lights. "You came," he said simply. They traded champagne and guarded confessions, about impulse, about transactions versus kindness. He admitted thinking about her boldness all day. She explained that his unprompted generosity had made her wonder if not everything needed calculation. The conversation edged toward something electric until his phone rang and reality intruded. He stepped back, professional, apologetic. The interruption spared her a mistake, one neither wanted to make in a world where appearances had consequences. She left the Meridian with a rain check and a complex knot of feelings. Tomorrow she would prove herself through work. Tonight she would let curiosity and caution sit side by side. Morning after the Meridian felt like a different life. Mia promised herself boundaries, no mixing of the personal and the professional. For a week she kept that promise in public, meetings, team briefs, tight deadlines, while nights were given to the Preston Hotel pitch. She moved through Everest media with the slow vigilance of someone determined that neither rumor nor romance would define her career. Richard, for his part, maintained a careful distance. In the boardroom he was exacting and attentive. In corridors he was polite but reserved. The restraint could be read as respect or as strategy. Mia couldn't tell which she preferred. Office banter hummed at the edges, Grace passing along hearty speculation, while Vivian offered measured counsel. The Preston folder he'd given her sat heavy on her desk, its weight both opportunity and reminder. The first presentation to James Harrington and his daughter Amanda took place in a room that smelled faintly of polished wood and seriousness. James Harrington carried himself like a man who measured risk as instinctually as breathing. Amanda, poised and immaculate, observed everything like an analyst, the tone, the slide transitions, the unstated assumptions. Richard was unexpectedly called away. Mia stepped in as the creative lead while her team watched from the wings. She navigated that hour with the poise that had won her the job, clear thinking, graceful pivots, and confident answers. She anchored the pitch in the sustainability priorities Amanda favored, reframing challenges as opportunities and delivering a vision that felt contemporary yet discreetly luxurious. The room held its breath. When the presentation concluded, James offered a curt, professional assessment, while Amanda delivered a barbed aside. Richard had a pattern, elevating women professionally, pursuing them personally, and leaving a trail of complicated fallout. Amanda's words lodged in Mia like a thorn. They were a warning from someone who had been inside a past that had soured. Mia wanted to dismiss it as bitterness, but the possibility it raised of being instrumentalized gnawed at her. That night, after too little sleep, she received an anonymous, "Be careful with Hayes. Check the original Preston proposal from 6 months ago. File room, cabinet 8, drawer 3." Curiosity and unease propelled her to the dim file room the next morning. Under humming fluorescence, she found the folder, Preston Hotel's Initial Approach. The proposal echoed parts of the strategy she and her team had built. In the margins, unmistakable handwriting, Richard's, recorded notes, tweaks, and the directive that stung the most: find fresh face to present. J.H. responds to new perspectives. Betrayal warmed into a rational, icy fury. Had she been the product of a calculated tactic? A charming CEO finding a new face to sell a revised idea? Had the crosswalk been happenstance or a prearranged advantage? The thought of being maneuvered for leverage clawed at her. She confronted the sensation by doubling down on work. If her value could be measured in results, she would make it incontrovertible. The second Preston meeting arrived unexpectedly early. Amanda requested a follow-up with more robust sustainability metrics. Richard was en route from Chicago, but Mia prepared to present without him, if she had to. She led the room with rigor. Instead of allowing the discovery to become a spectacle, she used it as a spur. She disclosed the existence of earlier work Everest had done, but emphasized how her team had reimagined it, creating a genuinely enriched sustainability roadmap with measurable KPIs, community partnerships, and phased implementation plans. Where the previous plan had suggested optics, her iteration delivered operational detail. She owned the narrative by producing an improved product, not by angering a room. James Harrington responded to clarity and competence. Amanda watched, stung and reluctant, but the progress was obvious. Afterward, James asked to speak with Mia alone. His questions were direct but fair. He probed intent and integrity, and then, satisfied, willingly moved forward with Everest as his agency. Yet Amanda returned late to the boardroom with a final, cold charge. She believed Richard had once courted her to influence her father, and when the engagement ended, the family had cooled toward him. The image that Amanda painted was damning and personal. It complicated Mia's sense of how personal life and business had overlapped. The parting words sank in with a weight that was less about Preston and more about ethics. Richard demanded to speak with her in the quiet after the meeting. He claimed the crosswalk encounter had been coincidence, that the earlier proposal had not been deployed maliciously, and that hiring her had been based on merit. He admitted mistakes with Amanda and acknowledged how appearances looked terrible. His candor was partial. His remorse seemed real in fragments. Mia didn't know whether to believe all of it. She did know this: she would not allow her career to be cast as the sum of someone else's maneuvering. Choosing to reclaim the story, she focused on outcomes, implementation, leadership, and credibility. The next weeks were a relentless motion of project sprints, partner meetings, and proof in the form of metrics. Preston's rollout produced encouraging early data, engagement upticks, promising bookings, and James Harrington became an advocate. Everest's reputation, buoyed by measurable success, grew. Still, the personal ache lingered. Each compliment or casual touch from Richard she cataloged and weighed. He behaved with a new kind of respect, less intrusive and more supportive. After a tense season of questions and clarifications, he surprised her with an announcement. He intended to step back from day-to-day operations to launch a literacy foundation. Vivian would assume greater executive authority. The news altered the calculus between them. Power had been a barrier to any intimacy. If he truly lessened his role, the imbalance would shrink. Whether he stepped back out of principle or to repair the dynamics he had damaged, Mia could not know. But the move offered space in which to reassess trust on equal terms. Work and reputation mattered most. Mia continued to refine teams, set clear processes, and embed transparency in every campaign. She preserved a place for curiosity about Richard, but insisted that her work stand as the evidence of her competence. In time, the rumor-muffled hallways of Everest began to hum with a different sound. Respect earned, not given. The weeks after Preston's launch were dense with implementation, partner contracts to finalize, rollouts to sequence, data to track. Mia took pride in the granular victories, a well-placed influencer integration, a conference room where the team finally agreed on brand voice, a community partnership that moved from proposal to pilot. The campaign's early metrics pleased the board, and James Harrington's endorsement opened discreet doors to additional luxury accounts. These wins hardened the truth she'd been trying to prove. Measurable results were the best antidote to rumor. But the interior ledger of feelings did not balance as quickly as the spreadsheets. She cataloged every exchange with Richard, measured praise that suggested respect, an occasional lingering look that suggested something more. He kept professional distance and offered authority when necessary, and Vivian's steady hand steadied Everest's operations. Between them, the line remained taut. Their public interactions were efficient and respectful. Private moments, rare, small, carried risks of misinterpretation. Mia reminded herself constantly why firm boundaries mattered. Perception could undermine merit. She also noticed something else: how he let his actions speak. Funding decisions for the foundation, the way he deferred to Vivian on executive matters, the reluctance to interject in creative detail. These were gestures with consequence. They narrowed the power differential and allowed a new type of proximity to develop, one negotiated and cautious. On an evening after a quarterly review celebrating Preston's success, Mia lingered in her office, savoring the quiet. A knock at her door interrupted the soft hum of the city. Richard stood there in jeans and an unbuttoned shirt, casual in a way that made him look younger and oddly vulnerable. "Congratulations," he said simply. "Thank you," Mia answered, keeping professional calm. They sat and talked about the campaign, the foundation, small, humane things, books that had influenced them, the stubbornness of certain mentors. When he finally stood to leave, he hesitated. "About the morning at the crosswalk," he said, awkward and honest. "I wasn't trying to manipulate anything, but I realize how it looked and the hurt that caused. I'm sorry." Apologies are real when accompanied by accountability. His willingness to step back from daily operations felt like one such account of consequence. The shift in his role narrowed the structural risk of a workplace romance. Less daily authority in his hands, more parity between them. Mia thought about the professional clarity she'd reclaimed through her work, about how she'd insisted on facts and metrics rather than explanations. She also considered the very human fact that feelings were complicated. The decision to permit a different kind of relationship did not occur in a single flash. It accumulated, a series of consistent actions, the foundation's work moving forward earnestly, Vivian's demonstrated leadership, and Mia's own confidence in her work. So when Richard eventually asked, not as a CEO, but as a man stepping away from his old habits, to share dinner, no expectations beyond getting to know each other, Mia agreed. Their first true date was unadorned and gently probing. They talked without the filter of corporate roles. She learned about the causes that marked him, and he learned about the small rituals that steadied her. The power imbalance, while not erased, was altered. He had chosen to reduce the structural advantages his position conferred. She, in turn, had proven that her career had a momentum of its own. When their lips finally met that first time, it felt deliberate and mutual, neither a claim nor a relinquishment, but an acceptance. The kiss did not erase prior complications. It simply acknowledged them while both committed to ongoing clarity. If there was insecurity, there was also an emerging practice of accountability. Talk openly, recuse where necessary, avoid private decision-making that affected the other without transparency. Months later, the foundation they'd discussed launched its first community center, and Mia stood beside Richard at the opening. The crowd clapped and the press took pictures. The moment felt like a punctuation in a sentence that had been written with care. Professionally, she remained a leader whose work was visible and verified. Personally, she had accepted the nuance of being with someone whose history was complicated and whose hands had reached into many corners of power. Everest itself continued to evolve under Vivian's steady oversight. Mia's creative department expanded. New hires arrived with enthusiasm, and the culture she'd fought to instill, openness, ethics, and the courage to create riskily but responsibly, took root. She spent her days alternating between hands-on creative direction and mentoring, and in evenings she and Richard navigated a relationship that required continual negotiation. Inevitably, friction surfaced. Old rumors occasionally re-emerged in the press. Outside voices tried to simplify a complex narrative. She responded with facts, data, client endorsements, campaign outcomes, and pointed to the growth under her leadership. The team rallied around integrity because they had seen it modeled: transparent briefings, clear credit for ideas, and a refusal to tolerate suggestion or implication that personal connections supplanted merit. Over time, both of them learned the mechanics of partnership: how to speak when trust frays, how to recuse from decisions that could appear compromised, how to protect the autonomy of the other. These were small rituals of repair that widened into a larger pattern. They began to plan together not as a boss and subordinate, but as two people building a life that encompassed work, purpose, and partnership. The story did not end with a neat pronouncement. Rather, it continued as an accrual of moments. Elective acts showing respect and equality. Public choices that matched private values. Each new campaign, each successful program launch at the foundation, each candid conversation about boundaries was another layer in a relationship built from accountability and achievement. By the time they stood at another foundation opening months later, applause around them, the narrative had shifted. Mia felt something steadier than vindication, a sense of ownership over her story. Her promotion was visible, her leadership unambiguous, and her partnership with Richard was one negotiated with attention. The city's lights beyond the ribbon of the center seemed less like a stage and more like a testament to choices made carefully and bravely. The foundation's opening was radiant. Children receiving books, volunteers bustling, press present but respectful. Standing beside Richard as he addressed the crowd, Mia felt a subtle but deep satisfaction. The dread that had once accompanied her name in certain corners of the office had faded into a steady pride rooted in measurable outcomes, mentorship, and resilience. Life did not transform into a flawless idyll. Headlines occasionally dredged old rumors. A careless question from a journalist required a composed reply. Yet the scaffolding Mia had built around her professional life sustained her. Clear processes, transparent credit, and a team that had internalized the value of ethics. Under her leadership, Everest's creative department moved from reactive client service to a recognized voice in brand narrative and social purpose. Young creatives came eager to work there because they had seen that risk could be encouraged without sacrificing integrity. At home, they negotiated privacy with deliberation. Their public faces were curated but honest. The story they shaped together emphasized mutual agency and respect. Mia continued to lead: campaign planning, client strategy, mentoring sessions. But she balanced it with a life where affection was not transactional. She learned to accept appreciation without skepticism. Richard learned to cede control more often and to accept critique without defensiveness. Their relationship's give and take modeled a negotiation both in boardrooms and at domestic tables. Sometimes the proving of her worth came down to numbers. When a headline suggested she had been fast-tracked, Mia responded with data: campaign growth percentages, client testimonials, and revenue impact. Facts quieted rumor in a way feelings never could. Credibility, she discovered, was a quieter but more lasting vindication than rumor's fleeting noise. On a private afternoon, they returned to the Meridian rooftop where it had all almost begun. The city glittered below.
"Do you remember what you said?" he asked, a little smile at the corner of his mouth.
She did. The memory of humiliation sat beside the memory of a bold impulse. "I do," she said, and I remember deciding not to let one impulsive sentence define my life.
He reached into his jacket and produced a small velvet box. The gesture felt miraculously like the next chapter rather than a rewrite of the old. "I want you to know exactly what this is," he said. "It's not an attempt to erase mistakes. It's an invitation to continue together on terms we know and accept: mutual respect, equality, and partnership." She accepted, not because consequences had disappeared, but because she had confirmed for herself a measured readiness. When he asked her to marry him, the answer came easily. "Yes," she said, and their kiss felt like a seal of a pact built from honesty and continued accountability. The years that followed were defined by work and care. The foundation grew, opening more centers and touching neighborhoods beyond their initial scope. Everest thrived under Vivian's leadership. Mia's team became an incubator of talent and bold ideas anchored in ethical practice. She mentored younger creatives, coached them through impossible deadlines, and encouraged them to hold strong to principles when the pressure to compromise arrived. At industry events, she negotiated deals with the same decisiveness with which she once defended a slide deck. At home, she and Richard navigated day-to-day life, sometimes messy, sometimes tender, with a humility that made partnership sustainable. When disputes arose, an aggressive vendor pitch or a miscommunication, they had a repertoire: acknowledge, recuse if needed, and repair. Those rituals built trust as effectively as any triumphant campaign. Mia often thought back to that ruined blouse, that handkerchief, and that reckless sentence on the crosswalk. She no longer needed to know whether it had been coincidence or calculated fate. What mattered was what she did next, asserting boundaries, demanding transparency, and refusing to let her worth be decided by someone else's assumptions. The choices that followed, how she led, how she responded, how she insisted the work speak for her, were the real story. Her team marked the Preston campaign's first year with a modest celebration. Grace toasted Mia for steadiness and courage. The room hummed with laughter and appreciation. The applause felt earned. In quieter moments, they reminisced about late nights and small triumphs, about a culture that had matured around a value set Mia had advocated for from the start. Once, over dinner by the river, Richard asked a question that surprised even him. "What do you want Everest to be known for in 20 years?" She looked out at the water and imagined a company known for bravery framed by care. "A place where creativity is matched by responsibility," she said. "Where people can do bold work without fearing the costs of speaking up." He nodded. "Then we'll build it that way," he said. The promise felt like a covenant, part public, part private, and entirely practical. Their life became a balance many strive for: meaningful careers, a partnership grounded in respect, and a public role managed with dignity. The crosswalk that had once held a cringe-worthy impulsive moment became less a scene of embarrassment and more a hinge in a narrative she'd written with her own choices. Impulses had altered her path, yes, but it was the deliberate decisions afterward that shaped the rest. When the foundation opened another center and Everest launched an award-winning campaign soon after, Mia and Richard stood side by side as partners. They had chosen one another with eyes open. The applause that greeted them felt like affirmation, not of drama, but of steadiness. Two people who had negotiated power, practiced accountability, and built a life together on purpose.